Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. In today's video, we're going to continue our Masterclass series, and this one is titled War or Peace. Now, what we're referring to is the choice that Germany has to make when Russia collapses, if they collapse, of course, and assuming that you're playing with the Russian Civil War expansion set, right? The reason I'm doing this video is because I've recently been seeing some talk online about why you would choose to do war. Because the normal thing to do would be to choose peace and have the Russians taken off the board and the Central Powers no longer have to fight them, right? And in almost all cases, that's going to be the right thing to do. Usually you're glad to see that happen if you are the Central Powers, right? So the question is, first of all, the question was, here, let me just go to that. This is on Discord. If you're not on Discord with the talk on global war, then I encourage you to do that because that's where you can talk with other people about this game and about other global war games as well. And also that's where I do most of my answering of questions. So originally the question was, like the person stated what the rule was and then asked, is there any reason Germany would or should pick this option? And there is, and I'm going to show you that. And then just yesterday, see that was a while back now, just yesterday, someone else posted on there and they said, it's so unrealistic. Does anyone have any suggestions of ways to house rule this? Or the Civil War happens anyway, but all East puppets don't exist and Germany has to fight both the Soviets and the White Russians in a three-way war. So I'm going to address that as well, but also I'm going to go beyond the rules, as so to speak, as this series is supposed to. That's why I'm doing this series. It's teaching you how to play the game, not just teaching you what the rules are. So let's get to it, okay? So you've come to the point of collapse. Now, if it could happen in a couple of different ways. It could be that Petrograd falls. And you can see Petrograd just on the left side of your screen there, where the medium factory is. That's the capital of Imperial Russia. Or it could happen through a collapse roll. Beginning in the spring of 1917, you roll the dice. And, with modifiers and whatever, you're going to perhaps collapse the Russians and they become Soviet Russia and no longer Imperial Russia. We're not going to get right into that though, because like I said, this isn't about the rules, this one. You might have seen this before, and if not, then it's in the rule book. It's in Appendix B. If you choose peace as an option, then you'll just go to Appendix B, and there's a long list of things that you will do, and that'll set it up. And it doesn't all happen right away. So you got to go through the rest of the turn, and then things start to happen, and that's when you do the setup for the Russian Revolution. And if Petrograd was captured, then you award the Petrograd point. You count up the Imperial Russia victory points, if there is any, and you put them in the bank for both the Allies and for the Soviet Russians to count up at the end of the game. So that's normally what you would do. Now, when you do that, what is going to happen, one of the things that's going to happen, is this is what the Soviets are going to get. So you take a look here, and this is what the Soviets get. And this is the minimum number of units that you see here. And that's what the Soviets are going to put on the board. All of the Imperial Russian units have been taken off, except for the factories. Those stay on. So these are the units that you're going to get. There's 14 infantry, 6 militia, 3 artillery, 1 armored train, 2 Cossacks, 3 cavalry, and a fighter. And also if you have any observation balloons or if you have any gas tokens, you get to keep them. And so that's what you're going to do. That's normally what's going to happen. Now, like I said, that's probably what you're going to do in almost all cases, but not necessarily, because you're going to look at things. For the most part, it's even going to be automatic. It's just when the Central Powers are really kicking the Imperial Russians' butt, that's when you're going to have to start calculating things. And it's not easy to do that because there's several factors that you're going to have to look into, like how much time is left in the war. How are things going on the Western Front right now? Who is Japan and Italy fighting for? Like, are either of them Central Powers, or are they both allies, or what's going on? What's going on in Africa? What's going on in the Balkans? There's a lot of things you're going to look at to decide whether or not you want to have a peace treaty with the Russians, or if you want to continue the war with Imperial Russia. So let's look at the positives for the peace treaty. Okay, so when you're looking at the positives for the peace treaty, there's really only one, and that is that you don't have to fight Russia anymore. I mean, that's a pretty big one, right? So all the units that you have in Eastern Germany and on the eastern part of Austria and on the northern part of the Ottoman Empire, those units can now leave and they can go somewhere else and fight another battle, right? And like I said, that's probably what's going to happen for you. But if you're beating the crap out of them, then not necessarily. But there's a fine line between that. Like, like how many territories that you have for the most part, because you're going to get some units. Okay, so before I go any further, I just want to talk about, there's a couple of rule clarifications that I made in anticipation of making this video as I was, going through and doing my checks and everything. I noticed that there was a couple of things that we didn't quite specify because, like I said earlier, you hardly ever choose war. So if you did choose war, then there was a couple of things, oh, it doesn't say that, so I better write it in. And it's a good thing I caught it now, because the next week is when Doug's sending the rule book off to get printed, and it's going to look pretty good. I've already seen it. Anyway, so a couple of things. First of all, if Petrograd falls and you don't, you choose war instead of peace, then you're not going to award that point right away. And Moscow is never going to become a victory city. We're talking about Petrograd up here, right? And Moscow over here. Normally, Moscow would become the victory city because the Soviets moved their capital to Moscow. Now, that's not going to happen anymore because there isn't going to be a Russian Revolution during the war. I mean, we assume that it is going to happen. It's just that it's not going to happen while World War I is on, because they're going to have to fight the Germans and the Austrians and the Ottomans. They're not going to have time to fight each other. Anyway, that's going to happen. Petrograd is going to be the victory city, but you're not going to award it until the end of the game, just like you do with all the other victory cities. So like whoever owns Paris, they get a point. Whoever owns Vienna, they get a point. Anyway, it's going to be Petrograd, and it won't be awarded until the end of the game. So that's the first thing. The other thing is the money. Now, the reason that the Germans get the Russian money is because they signed a peace agreement with them. And so, as a bonus for doing that, they've given Germany a bunch of money, right? Here's some money, don't attack us anymore. Well, I mean, if they're going to keep attacking them, even if you took Petrograd, and they're going to lose their money, but they're going to lose it to the bank. They're not going to give it to the Germans because Germany didn't sign that peace agreement with them. So that money is just going to be lost. Now, if you collapse and Petrograd didn't fall, like you collapsed because of a roll instead of Petrograd falling, then you're not going to lose the money because you didn't lose your capital. Normally, we're going to take that money and give it to Germany anyway, just because you collapsed. But in this case, we're not going to give you that money. And those are the two clarifications that I had to make, because it didn't really specify. And I just know that I was going to get a bunch of questions on that. And well, I should, right? But like I said, this is something that is not very common for this to happen. And we did identify it in playtesting. It was the Illinois boys that they told us, well, why would we ever not keep going and continue the war if Russia's losing? If you've already started moving into Russia, just keep attacking them and take their territory. You're a lot stronger than them, and that's true. And so that's when we added the units that we did, right? You'll see in a minute what I'm talking about as far as adding units. But we had to do that, otherwise the game was going to be broken that way. Like, people were hardly ever going to choose to do the Russian Revolution. And there really is a case to be made for doing that Russian Revolution, right? We identified that, and we fixed that problem quite a long time ago. And you'll see what we're going to do about that. Some of the considerations that you're going to have as well. First of all, the biggest one, aside from Russia, we'll get to Russia in a minute, but the biggest one is, how are things going on the Western Front over here? Because if Germany's not doing so well on the Western Front, then of course, you're going to want to get rid of the Russians and move all of your stuff over to the Western Front so that you can stop the French and stop the British from overrunning the Germans and possibly the Austrians as well, right? So a lot of it's going to depend on what's going on over here. But assuming that you're doing all right, like let's say that the Germans have taken Lorraine and they've got a stack of stuff here, and even if, let's say, they took Belgium and they've got a bunch of stuff here as well, whether or not you take Belgium doesn't matter, just as long as you're secure over here. And barring a miracle of dice god rolling, they're not getting through there anytime soon. And so that's got to be the first thing that happens, is that you're doing good there, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't even consider continuing the war with the Russians. And then the other thing is, how are things going in the Balkans and also the Middle East? Because if things are going badly in the Middle East, then that can be a problem for you as well, right? But also, like if the British are coming up up through Greece here, and they're threatening Austria from the bottom there, then again, for sure you're going to want to get rid of the Russians out of the game, right? Out of the war, I should say. They're still in the game, but they'll be out of the war. So that's another good reason right there to continue or to have them go to revolution. But if you're doing good, like let's say you've got the Austrians have Bulgaria, like they're probably going to get eventually, and they've got Serbia, and then let's say the Ottomans have Macedonia, and I showed you in my last video there how it's possible to take Macedonia in the prequel, and maybe they've got Thessaly as well. Maybe they don't, I don't know. But anyway, if you're secure down here as well, then you're doing good, and you can get going on that, right? So those are the first things that you're going to consider, is how are things going in the rest of the world. And again, like there's other considerations. Like if you're doing really well in the rest of the world, then I would, and you're doing well in Russia, then I would for sure continue the fight in Russia rather than give it up and just concentrate on the other guys. Because you could end up losing the game even though you're doing well all around the map, just by giving up all those victory points in Russia. And I'll show you what I mean here. So there's 7 or 8 victory points that you can get here, okay? Let's just take a look at those. So Germany's got a few victory points. Let's just put some roundels down here, okay? There's a victory point. There's a victory point. There's a few victory points up here. I think it's these two. It could be this one. And Austria, this could be a German or an Austrian victory point in here, one or the other. These are victory points down in the Balkans, so those are good. And then the Ottomans, this is a victory point, this is a victory point, this is a victory point. So there's 3 victory points. Now, if you're doing well everywhere and you decide to let the Russians go to revolution, well, now the Soviets can come back and take these territories away from you, and there's nothing you can do about it because you have a peace treaty with them. You might have played the game already and you've seen that and think, well, geez, that is kind of a problem, right? You know, I went and got those and now I lost them by the end of the game. Well, this is a way that you're probably not going to lose them. And so why would you keep going? Well, let's just say that you've done that. Let's give these guys another territory. This is only if you're doing really well. Let's give the entire Ukraine here to the Austro-Hungarians. So let's just assume that you're doing really well here, right? So then the Germans, they're gonna be kicking more ass than anybody. Let's give them these territories. And obviously we want to give them Petrograd. Let's give them this one as well. So let's say you're doing this well. Now, I didn't put units on the board because I think it would be easier for you to see like this, right? How this can be done. It doesn't really matter how many units you've got. It doesn't, right? Like if you barely got any units, and there's tons of Russian units over here, then certainly you're going to want to go and knock them out of the war, right? But if you're doing this well here, then you might consider it, right? Like you take a look around there, and that's a lot of territories. Now, you're going to be doing extraordinary if this happens. And believe me, this can happen. Like we've seen it several times because a lot depends on the early part of the game, the first couple of turns in the war. If you get the jump on the Russians, or if they get the jump on you, that can go very badly for the side that doesn't get that jump. A lot depends on those first few turns in the war because there's nothing to take them back with. You don't have big stacks of units around the board to, you know, break up and go after somebody, right? You've only got a couple of units here, there, and everywhere. And so you can't really respond too much if you get your butt kicked on the front lines where most of the units are. Like if you're on the front there and the Germans and Austrians have a couple of good turns, 2 or 3 good turns, and they bust through that front line, well, there's not much in behind them, is there? So you're just heading across the openness there and you're taking them out. And kind of vice versa as well. Although it's more compact in here, it's harder to get further in there if you're the Russians. But the other way though, if you can get through that front line early in the game, then there's not much in behind them. And so this can happen quite easily if the rolling goes that way. And that's important because what's going to happen, and I mentioned this earlier, what's going to happen is for all the manpower icons left over, like here's one here, here's one here, there's 3 in Moscow. There's only 2 in all of Russia that have more than 1 on them, and that's Moscow and Petrograd. But if you've taken out Petrograd, then there's 3 in Moscow, and the other places there's no more than 1 of them. Here, let's go take a trip around. Okay, so we're leaving them in this scenario that we're talking about here. There's 1 here, there's 2, there's 3, there's 3 there, there's 1, there's 1. Did I count that one? There's that one, there's that one. And then there's not much until you get way over here, Novosibirsk, and then you've got these 4 down over here. But I tell you, if Japan's in there and Japan takes this one, then you know that's even more of an incentive for you to get it. So what happens is you put an infantry on all of those, and any factories that you have left, you put an artillery on them, right? So I've counted this up. If you were to do exactly this, then you're going to give them 16 infantry here and 4 artillery, because you're going to have 4 factories left. It doesn't matter how big your factory is. If it's a minor or a major, you only get 1. And then Moscow and Petrograd will each get a cavalry. So because Petrograd is gone, you get just 1 cavalry. So when you're looking at this is 30 units over here, and this is 21 units. Now, you're also going to keep the units that you still have on the board as the Russians. So how many units is that, right? You're going to have to add that into your calculation. Do they have 15 units left over, or do they only have 5 or 6, right? Like if it's more than 10, then it's getting kind of dicey, right? And again, with all the other factors, how well you're doing, and if the Japanese join your side or the other side, right? So these are things you're going to consider. Now, they're going to keep their money, but their money isn't going to be much, right? Like one of the positives that you're going to have as the Central Powers is if you've got this much territory, that's 10 IPP worth of Russian territory that you've taken from them. And so that's 10 IPP more for the Central Powers. And the good thing is that you don't really need any more than that. There's no more victory points in Russia for you. You're looking at all of them right now, right? I showed you what they were, and there's no more over there. So you don't have to go any further than that. All you have to do is defend yourself. Now, you could go and take Moscow. Like if they move their capital, they have to move it somewhere if you took Petrograd. So if they moved it to Moscow or if they moved it into someplace else, you might think about going and taking their capital because you're gonna spill their money on them again, right? They're gonna have to give that back to the bank, but they're gonna be down $10 right now, right? And so they're not gonna have much money. They're not gonna have much in the way of units, like those all those units that I showed you there. It looks like a big stack of infantry, but they're spread out, right? They're all over the place, and so that's not great for if you're the Russians, right? And you can mop some of those up pretty easily. And you probably don't have to put much more in there to defend those victory points you have, especially if it's late in the game, because this isn't going to happen in 1915, right? You're never going to get that far. In this game, if you've played it, you know what I'm talking about. You're not going to go racing across any stretch of this map. You're plodding along, right? You're taking one territory at a time. There's no blitzing, and it's slow going. And so if you're getting this far, then you're probably at least in 1917, maybe 1918. It makes a difference, I guess, if you're playing with the variable ending or not, because if you're not, then you know exactly when the game is going to end. And even then, like if you've got Petrograd, then that's one capital gone, plus all these territories are gone. And so like the game could end a little earlier than it might, right? So there's all of that. You're also going to want to know what the score is, like how many points do the British and the French and the Americans have, like do they have more than you already, right? Like you're basically going to look for what is your best path to victory if you're the Central Powers. And like it's the German player's choice whether or not to accept peace or war. But you're going to want to talk to your teammates about that if there are people on your team. If it's only, if there's only a couple of you playing and you're playing all of the Central Powers, then you got nobody to talk to about it. But there's a lot of calculations you're going to want to do when it comes to the collapse there, like whether you should do this or not. Like I said, if you're not even close to what I've shown you here, then you're not going to do it. Like you have to be able to take out most of their manpower icons. Like if you left Petrograd there, that's 3 manpower icons right there. That's 3 more infantry and a cavalry and an artillery that they're going to get in Petrograd. So there's 5 units right there, right? So, it's something you're going to want to look at closely. And again, how much time is left in the war? Because maybe you did get over there, and it's still 1916. So there's a lot more time for them to come back. And the other thing is that once you do this, you're never going to send them to revolution during the war. Once you've made that choice, then it's made. There's not going to be a revolution for the rest of the game. And so with the Allies knowing that, then they are free to lend lease to the Russians without worrying about the Russians taking their stuff and becoming the Soviets, right? They know they're going to be the Russians for the rest of the game. Plus, like they can bring their own units over there on transports. That's going to lessen the amount they have on the Western Front. I mean, there's a lot to look at, right? Without knowing where all of the units on the board are, it's hard to really drill down too far. But this is in general that you're going to need a lot of territories taken in order for you to even consider continuing the war with them. If you do go to peace, then of course, like the Central Powers can concentrate on the other places, but it's those victory points. That's the big thing as far as I'm concerned, is it's the victory points that you're might be giving up. But I tell you though, like if Russia doesn't collapse until near the end of 1918, then the war's not going to go on for very much longer. And so the Soviets aren't going to have as much time to take those points away from you. They're only going to have those 6 turns after the war ends in order to do the Russian Civil War. And so again, the timing is a factor on that, right? Now, if you're kicking butt like this, and it's even worth thinking about, you might want to just get out a piece of paper and start writing it all down. How much are you going to give up, right? As far as manpower icons, how many factories, how much stuff are they going to get? How much do they have left? Versus how much are they going to get if you sue for peace? Now, remember, that's the minimum amount right there that they're going to get, that you see on the Soviet card. However, it's likely that they're going to get the minimum amount, because if you're kicking their butt, they're probably not going to have a lot left over. The only way they are going to have a lot left over is if the reason you made it so far, if they decided to pull everybody back to Moscow or something, right? In anticipation, like they weren't doing so well. So then they got a big stack of like 15 guys here or something, right? 15 units of all types. Then, again, you're writing it down, you're calculating how much money have you taken, and again, how well things are happening everywhere else. What's happening with Italy. If Italy is part of the Allies, then how is this shaping up? This standoff here. What's going on with the Balkans there? And are the Ottomans in trouble at all? Because they're probably not going to be. Like if they're doing this well here, then that's an extra 3 IPP for them. That's a lot of money for them, right? But that doesn't mean that they're guaranteed to be secure down there. You have to play the game well. What's really important, of course, is your capital and your other 2 home country territories. Actually, there's 4 altogether. I forgot about Thrace there. So if you're in danger of losing any of your home country territories, regardless of which central power you are, then that's just going to take away from your victory points, right? Because each one that you lose is going to be a lost victory point. And so that's another thing that you need to consider. Have you got your home country secure? Like if the back end of Austria-Hungary is not secure, and any victory points you gain are going to be negated by an amphibious assault or something, then maybe it's not worth it, right? So you're going to consider those kind of things. How's the battle with the navies going up here between Germany and Britain? Like, is Britain in here? Or is there any British Navy at all? Because it's possible for the Germans to destroy the British Navy as well, right? And that's not unheard of. I've seen it a few times. So that's a lot of things to consider. And I tell you, if you can do it, then I would say go for it because of those victory points. Because ultimately, that's what's going to win you the game. It's not how much territory you take, it's how many victory points you have versus how many victory points your opponent has. That's the only factor that matters at the end of the game. So all you got to do is get more points than them. And like I said, there's 7 or 8 points in there. And when I say 7 or 8, because I'm just, did the Ottomans get this far? Or do they have this point over here? Do the British have it, right? So it could be that you have 1 less than that. But there's 4 over here for the Ottomans if you get all of these. And there's 1 for the Austrians there. And what was it, 4 for the Germans? 3 or 4 for the Germans, depending on whether Germany got this one or whether Austria got that one. So those are points that you can secure quite easily. Nobody else is going to be able to get them in there to take them off of you. It's only the Russians that are going to be able to take them back. And of course, you've done this just because you're beating the crap out of the Russians. So let me just go back to that discussion that was happening there to address this. This guy asks, is this realistic? I think it is. You're trying to assume that that the Russians are going to go to revolution regardless of what happens. But think about that now. How are you going to conduct a revolution if there's artillery that's raining down on you from everywhere and bullets that are flying and they're all aimed at you, right? You're not going to really be conducting a revolution. So what he suggested was getting rid of the puppet states. What he's talking about is Poland and Finland and the Ukraine. Well, in this scenario, if you're going to choose this, you've probably taken them out, except for maybe Finland, but you weren't going to fight the Finns anyway, right? The Finns are having a civil war there if you go to revolution. So you're just talking about Poland or the Ukraine. And then he's talking about, that there would still be a war between the white Russians and the Soviets and the Germans. It would be a three-way war. Well, like if you're the Soviets or the white Russians, are you really going to fight each other while the Central Powers are beating the crap out of you? Probably not, right? Like, I don't think you are. And when we talk about putting these units on here, well, isn't that what you did? You put a bunch of units on here. Now, the Germans, the Ottomans, and the Austrians, they don't give a shit if you are a commie or if you're a member of the Romanov family. They don't care who you are. If you're Russians, they're going to shoot at you. They're at war with you. So what's the difference to them, right? They're fighting Russians. They don't care which army you belong to. So what I'm saying is that it is realistic. You are fighting all of the Russians, regardless of what side they are on. And I don't think they're going to break apart if, like they might think they're going to. But when you keep attacking them, then they've got no choice but to fight you, right? Shooting each other isn't going to do them any good, because those are people that you could use to fight the Central Powers with, especially the Germans, right? And so I think it is realistic that if the peace treaty was never signed, if the Germans and the Austrians kept going. The Ottomans didn't really make it that far, but this is a game and we're talking about if you did, right? This of course is overperforming compared to what happened in the war. So if you did overperform and you were kicking the Russians' ass, there's no way that they could have had a revolution until the war was over, until the Germans went home. If they did, they might have just decided to keep everything, Ukraine might be a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and maybe that empire never broke up. I mean, there's a lot of ifs and whats and whatevers, but in this scenario where the Central Powers win the war, this is possible, right? And so that's why it's set up the way that it is. And like you're more than welcome to house rule anything you want to do with this game or any global war game that you want. That's fine. But I think that we've given this a lot of thought. You might find that when you do try to do this, that, oh, I never thought of that. Well, how many times we said that to ourselves or to each other? Like there's a lot to consider in these games. And some of the questions that you get, you kind of laugh to yourself because, yeah, I thought that a couple years ago too, It's not. I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm just saying that we've been down these roads before, and you're welcome to try it yourself. Hey, if you come up with something great, let me know. That's awesome. It's just that I do believe that this is the way that that is probably going to work the best until somebody proves me wrong. Anyway, so that's about all I have here. Now, I was going to do a video on the Western Front next, but I was in the process of getting a player aid made for it, and my printing shop in town here, the one that I use, the one that I really like, their machine was down this week, so I'm not going to be able to get to that next week, and that's why this video is coming out instead of that one. So expect that video on the Western Front and how to break trench lines in the next video, maybe even the next 2 videos. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. Take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade out.